an original story narrated exclusively for Love Written in Silence. The winter afternoon hung pale and cold over the Derbyshire countryside as Miss Eleanor Shaw's hired carriage rolled through the iron gates of Verrington House. The estate rose before her like a monument to permanence. Stone walls the color of ash, windows tall enough to frame entire lives, chimneys exhaling smoke into a sky that threatened more snow. She had sworn never to return here. Yet here she sat, gloved hands folded in her lap, spine straight against the worn velvet seat, eyes fixed on the approaching facade, with the stillness of someone who had learned to master her own expression. She was 32 now. No longer the girl who had once walked these gardens with her heart unguarded. The years had refined her, sharpened her. She had built a life in London's modest artistic circles, earning a reputation as a miniaturist of uncommon precision. Her work hung in drawing rooms and private studies. She painted the daughters of merchants, the sons of minor gentry, the occasional clergyman or scholar. It was honest work. It kept her independent. It kept her mother in a decent lodging with a fire that did not go out in winter. When the commission arrived 3 weeks ago, she had stared at the letter for a full hour before opening it. The Duke of Verrington requested her services for an official portrait to hang in the parliamentary halls. The fee was generous, extravagant even, enough to secure her mother's care for 2 years, enough to refuse only if pride mattered more than survival. She had accepted. The carriage halted before the main entrance. A footman in dark livery stepped forward to open the door. Eleanor descended with practiced grace, her traveling cloak dusted with snow, her expression calm. The great hall doors stood open. Warm light spilled onto the stone steps. She could hear voices within. Laughter, the clink of crystal. A gathering then. She had hoped to arrive quietly. The footman led her inside. The hall was exactly as she remembered. High ceilings adorned with plasterwork, a marble staircase curving upward, portraits lining the walls, generations of Verringtons, gazing down with expressions of serene authority. A fire roared in the hearth. Clusters of guests stood in conversation, their silks and woolen coats a palette of deep burgundy, forest green, charcoal gray. Conversations paused as she entered. Not abruptly, just a slight shift in the air. Eyes turned, assessed. A woman in emerald silk whispered something to her companion. A gentleman near the fire straightened, his gaze lingering a moment, too long. Eleanor kept her chin level. She had learned long ago that dignity was a choice, not a condition, and then she felt it. A gaze that did not waver, that did not pretend politeness or curiosity. A gaze that held weight. She turned. Across the room, past the clusters of guests and the flicker of candlelight, stood the Duke of Verrington. He had not changed. Or rather, he had changed in ways that only deepened what had always been there. Tall, broad-shouldered, dark hair touched with gray at the temples, a face that might have been carved from the same stone as the house itself. Strong jaw, steady eyes, the kind of face that inspired confidence in Parliament and unease in drawing rooms. He was looking at her, not glancing, not observing. Looking, she held his gaze. Her heartbeat quickened, but her expression remained still. A woman beside him said something. He did not respond, did not look away. Eleanor felt the air tighten in her lungs. Finally he moved, not toward her, but with intention. He excused himself from the group and crossed the hall with the deliberate pace of a man who did not hurry, but who always arrived. He stopped 3 feet from her, close enough that she could see the faint lines at the corners of his eyes, close enough that she caught the scent of wool and winter air. "Miss Shaw," he said. His voice was exactly as she remembered. Low, steady, the kind of voice that did not need to rise to command attention. "Your Grace," she replied. A pause, not awkward, simply waited. "I trust your journey was not too taxing." It was adequate. "The roads can be difficult this time of year." I managed. Another pause. His eyes searched hers. She did not look away. "You have been staring," she said quietly. "I have not. You have been looking at me since I walked in." He did not deny it this time. Instead, his mouth curved into something that was not quite a smile, something quieter, more honest. "Longer than that," he said. The words hung between them. Not a confession, not an apology, simply the truth. Eleanor's breath caught. She had prepared herself for formality, for polite distance, for the careful architecture of professional interaction. She had not prepared for this. A servant appeared at her elbow, breaking the moment. "Miss Shaw, if you would follow me, I will show you to your quarters." She nodded, turned to follow. But as she walked away, she felt his gaze still on her, steady, unyielding, and she realized with a clarity that felt like cold water that whatever she had come here to do, it would not be simple. The east wing of Verrington House was quieter than the main halls. The corridors here were narrower, the ceilings lower, the light softer. Eleanor's quarters consisted of a sitting room and a modest bedchamber, both overlooking the estate gardens. The furniture was simple, but well made. A writing desk near the window, a wardrobe of dark oak, a bed with clean linens, and a quilted coverlet. A fire already burned in the hearth, the wood crackling with steady warmth. The housekeeper, a woman of perhaps 50 with graying hair and a capable air, set Eleanor's traveling case on the bench at the foot of the bed. "If you require anything, Miss Shaw, you need only ring. Supper will be served in the dining hall at 7, though if you prefer a tray brought to your room, that can be arranged. A tray would be preferable, thank you." The housekeeper nodded. Her expression was polite, but there was something in her eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or caution. "You have been here before," the woman said quietly. It was not quite a question. "Yes," Eleanor replied. "Some years ago." The housekeeper's mouth tightened slightly. "The household remembers." Eleanor met her gaze. "I am here to work, Mrs. Calloway. Mrs. Calloway. I am here to fulfill a commission, nothing more." The housekeeper inclined her head. "Of course, miss." But as she left, Eleanor saw the doubt in her posture, the careful way she closed the door. Eleanor stood alone in the center of the room. She removed her gloves slowly, finger by finger, then her cloak. She unpacked her case with ritualistic care, brushes first, arranged by size on the writing desk. Then her charcoal sticks, her palette knives, her small jars of linseed oil, and turpentine, each tool a tether to her identity. Each one a reminder that she was not the girl who had left this house, heartbroken and bewildered. She was a professional now, a woman of skill and reputation. She would paint the portrait. She would collect her fee. She would leave. That was all. She sat at the desk and looked out the window. The gardens were blanketed in snow. Bare trees stood like sentinels. In the distance, she could see the outline of the conservatory, its glass walls fogged with condensation. She had loved that place once. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. Yes, a young maid entered, carrying a silver tray. "Your supper, miss." "Thank you." The girl set the tray on the small table near the hearth. Bread, cheese, cold roasted chicken, a pot of tea. Simple fare, but more than adequate. As the maid turned to leave, she hesitated. "Begging your pardon, miss, but the Duke requests your presence tomorrow morning at 9, in his study, for the first sitting." Eleanor's pulse quickened. "Of course. Please convey my acknowledgement." The maid curtsied and left. Eleanor poured herself a cup of tea. Her hand was steady. That at least she could control. The following morning, Eleanor woke before dawn. She dressed with care, choosing a gown of deep charcoal gray, with a high collar and long sleeves. Practical, professional. She pinned her hair into a simple knot at the nape of her neck. No adornment, no softness. She gathered her sketchpad, charcoal, and a small case of preliminary tools. Then she made her way through the quiet corridors toward the Duke's study. The house was still waking. Servants moved like shadows, lighting fires, carrying trays, opening curtains. No one spoke to her. A few nodded in acknowledgement. Others simply stepped aside. She reached the study at precisely 9. The door was ajar. She knocked lightly. "Enter." She stepped inside. The study was a room of books and leather and polished wood. Shelves lined 3 walls, filled with volumes on law, philosophy, history, agriculture. A large desk sat near the window, its surface covered with correspondence and ledgers. 2 chairs faced the hearth, where a fire burned low. The light was good here, natural, steady. The Duke stood near the window, his back to her. He wore a dark coat, simply cut, no ornamentation. His hands were clasped behind him. He turned as she entered. "Miss Shaw, Your Grace." He gestured toward one of the chairs near the hearth. "Please, sit. We should discuss the particulars." She sat, arranging her skirts, setting her sketchpad on her lap. He took the chair opposite her. Not behind the desk. Not at a distance. Close enough that she could see the faint scar along his jawline, a remnant of some long-ago accident. "I appreciate your willingness to undertake this commission," he said. "It is my profession. Even so, A pause. I will need several preliminary sittings, she continued, her voice steady, to capture the structure of your face, the posture, the light. The final work will take perhaps 3 weeks, depending on the complexity. That is acceptable. I will require good light, preferably in the morning. This room suits that requirement. Yes, another pause, longer this time. Do the accommodations suit you? He asked. They are more than adequate. If you require anything, I do not. He studied her. Not with the intensity of the previous evening, but with something quieter, something that felt like regret. You have done well for yourself, he said. I have survived. More than that, I think. She did not respond. He leaned back slightly in his chair. I requested you specifically for this commission. I assumed as much. Does that trouble you? It is not my place to be troubled by a client's preferences. You are not merely a client to me, Miss Shaw. Her hand tightened on her sketchpad. With respect, Your Grace, that is precisely what I am. He did not argue. But something flickered in his eyes. Something she could not name. Do you remember the conservatory? He asked. Her breath stilled. She remembered. She remembered the way the light had filtered through the glass, the way the air had smelled of earth and green things, the way he had stood beside her, close enough that their sleeves had brushed, and how that small contact had felt like a promise. I remember, she said quietly. I have not changed it. That is your affair. Eleanor, Miss Shaw. He stopped, nodded. Miss Shaw, she opened her sketchpad. Shall we begin? He rose without another word and moved to stand near the window, where the light fell across his face. She studied him for a long moment. The line of his jaw, the set of his shoulders, the faint weariness around his eyes that had not been there before. Then she began to sketch. The room filled with the soft scratch of charcoal on paper, the crackle of the fire, the distant sound of footsteps in the hall. Neither of them spoke, but the silence between them was not empty. It was full of everything they could not say. The days that followed settled into a rhythm. Each morning, Eleanor arrived at the study at 9. The Duke was always there, waiting. They exchanged the barest of greetings. Then he took his position near the window, and she began to work. She sketched his profile, the angle of his brow, the curve of his mouth. She noted the way light caught the gray in his hair, the faint lines at the corners of his eyes. She worked with precision, her hand steady, her focus absolute. He did not speak during the sittings, but his eyes occasionally drifted to her hands as she worked, to the way her fingers moved across the page, to the small furrow that appeared between her brows when she concentrated. She pretended not to notice, but she did. One afternoon, as she adjusted the angle of his chin, her fingers grazed the edge of his collar. Both of them froze. She did not pull away immediately. Neither did he. The moment stretched, thin, taut. Then she withdrew her hand and returned to her work. Forgive me, she said quietly. There is nothing to forgive. But the air in the room had changed. Outside the study, whispers circulated. Guests still lingered at Verrington House, minor politicians and members of the gentry who had come for the winter gathering. They noticed the duration of the sittings, the way the Duke's demeanor shifted when Miss Shaw was near, the way he watched the clock in the drawing room, as if counting the minutes until morning. One evening, as Eleanor passed through the corridor near the main hall, she overheard 2 women speaking in low voices. It is unwise, one of them said, to employ a woman with a history. She was here before, was she not? 7 years ago. There was talk, though nothing confirmed. Still, a man in his position should be more careful. Eleanor did not pause, did not flinch. She continued down the corridor, as if she had heard nothing. But that night, alone in her room, she stood at the window and stared out at the darkened gardens. She considered leaving, packing her case, sending word that she could not complete the commission, returning to London and the safety of her small studio and the life she had built without him. But she did not. She stayed, not because of the fee, not because of pride, but because something in her needed to see this through. The formal reception was held on a cold Thursday evening. The purpose was ostensibly to celebrate the progress of several parliamentary initiatives. But in truth, it was an opportunity for alliances to be reaffirmed and influence to be measured. The great hall had been prepared with meticulous care. Candles in silver candelabras, tables laden with roasted meats, glazed vegetables, fruit preserves, and wine. A string quartet played near the hearth. Eleanor had been invited as a matter of professional courtesy. The preliminary sketches for the portrait were to be displayed in the library, where select guests could view them and offer their approval. She dressed with care, a gown of deep gray silk, modest in cut but well made. Her only adornment was a silver brooch that had belonged to her grandmother, a small piece shaped like a sprig of heather. She arrived in the hall just as the guests were beginning to gather. She kept to the edges of the room, observing. This was not her world. She did not belong among these people, but she had learned to move through such spaces with quiet dignity. A servant approached with a tray of wine. She accepted a glass, but did not drink. Across the room, the Duke stood in conversation with several men, members of Parliament, she assumed. They spoke in low, serious tones. He nodded occasionally, his expression attentive but unreadable. Then his gaze lifted. He found her across the room. For a moment, everything else seemed to fall away. Then one of the men beside him spoke, and the Duke returned his attention to the conversation. Eleanor turned away. She made her way toward the library, where the sketches had been arranged on a table near the window. A small group of guests had already gathered to view them. She stood at a respectful distance, listening to their murmured comments. Quite striking. The likeness is remarkable. She has captured his bearing well. Eleanor allowed herself a small measure of satisfaction. Then a voice cut through the murmurs. Louder, deliberate. It is remarkable, is it not, how some mistakes resurface? The room stilled. Eleanor turned. A man stood near the hearth. Sir Nathaniel Corwin, a member of Parliament, and a known ally of the Duke. He was perhaps 50, with thinning hair, and a smile that did not reach his eyes. I beg your pardon, someone said. Sir Nathaniel gestured toward the sketches. His Grace has always had a weakness for youthful indiscretions. It is admirable, in a way, how forgiving he can be. The words were spoken lightly, almost casually, but their intent was clear. Eleanor's breath caught. She expected someone to laugh, to deflect, to change the subject, but no one did. The silence stretched. Then the Duke's voice cut through it. Calm, clear, Sir Nathaniel. All eyes turned. The Duke stood in the doorway. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Miss Shaw is here at my request, he said. She is a professional of considerable skill and reputation. Any decision made years ago was mine alone. She conducted herself with nothing but dignity. Any insinuation to the contrary is both inaccurate and unwelcome. The room was utterly still. Sir Nathaniel's smile faltered. Your Grace, I meant no offense. Then you will have no difficulty offering an apology. Sir Nathaniel's face darkened, but he inclined his head stiffly. My apologies, Miss Shaw. Eleanor nodded once. She did not trust herself to speak. The Duke turned and left the room. Slowly, conversation resumed, but the atmosphere had changed. Guests exchanged glances. Whispers began. Eleanor set down her glass and quietly left the library. She did not see the Duke for the rest of the evening. She returned to her quarters and sat by the fire, her hands folded in her lap, her mind racing. He had defended her, publicly, at great cost. She did not know what to do with that knowledge. The following morning, she learned the consequences. Letters had arrived overnight. Several members of Parliament had sent curt notes withdrawing their support for initiatives the Duke had championed. Invitations to gatherings were quietly rescinded. Allies became distant. Eleanor heard of this not from the Duke, but from Mrs. Calloway, who brought her breakfast tray with a troubled expression. The household is unsettled, miss, the housekeeper said quietly. There is talk that His Grace has damaged his standing. Because of me, Mrs. Calloway did not deny it. Eleanor set down her teacup. I must speak with him. He is in the portrait room, miss. Eleanor rose and made her way through the corridors. Her heart beat fast, but her steps were steady. She found him standing before the easel, where her preliminary sketches were arranged. He did not turn when she entered. You should not have done that, she said. I did what was necessary. You have lost allies. I have lost nothing that mattered. She crossed the room until she stood beside him. Why did you defend me so publicly? You knew the cost. He was silent for a long moment. Then he turned to face her. Because 7 years ago, he said quietly, I made a choice that I believed was right, and it was the greatest mistake of my life. She stared at him. What are you saying? He gestured toward the door. Dismiss the footman. She did. When they were alone, he closed the door. Then, for the first time, he spoke not as a duke, but as a man. There was an investigation, he said, 7 years ago. Parliamentary. Several estates were being scrutinized for financial irregularities. I was not guilty of wrongdoing, but I was connected to men who were. My name was mentioned. My associations questioned. Eleanor's hands tightened at her sides. I was warned, he continued, by men whose counsel I trusted. They told me that anyone connected to me would be exposed, dragged through inquiries, humiliated, ruined. He paused. His voice was steady, but his eyes were not. I thought of you, he said. Your reputation, your family, your future. I thought that if I ended our relationship abruptly, without explanation, you would be spared. That silence would protect you. Eleanor felt something crack inside her chest. So you left me, she said quietly, without a word, without a reason. Yes, you thought I was too fragile to choose my own risk. I thought I was protecting you. You thought wrong. He flinched, but he did not look away. I know, he said. Eleanor turned away from him. She walked to the window and stared out at the snow-covered gardens. Her breath came in shallow bursts. You kept me unknowing, she said, as if I were a child, as if I had no right to decide what I could bear. I was a fool. Yes, you were. Silence. Then she turned back to face him. I survived, she said. I built a life. I became someone beyond you. I know. But I did it believing I had been discarded, that I had meant nothing. His jaw tightened. You meant everything. The words hung between them. Eleanor's eyes burned, but she did not weep. I cannot undo the past, he said quietly. I cannot give you back those years. But I can tell you the truth now. And I can stand before a room full of men whose favor I need and tell them that you are worth more than all of them combined. She stared at him. That is what I did last night, he said. Not because I seek forgiveness, but because it was true. Eleanor's breath shook. She did not know what to say, so she said nothing. She simply stood there in the cold light of morning and let the truth settle between them. The house was quieter in the days that followed. Most of the guests had departed. The political allies who remained were distant, their interactions with the Duke formal and brief. Eleanor heard the servants whispering. She saw the way the housekeeper's expression tightened when she passed the study, but the portrait sessions continued. Each morning, she arrived at 9. Each morning, the Duke was waiting. They did not speak of the reception. They did not speak of the past, but something had shifted. The silence between them was no longer heavy with things unsaid. It was simply silence, companionable, almost peaceful. One afternoon, as she worked on the finer details of his expression, he spoke. Where will you go when this is finished? She did not look up from her work. Back to London, to your studio. Yes, and your mother. She is well. The physician says she may have several good years yet. I am glad. A pause. And you, she asked. What will you do? Rebuild, he said simply. It will take time, but I have done it before. She glanced at him. You do not regret it. Defending you. Yes, he met her gaze. No, she returned to her work, but her hand trembled slightly. That evening, as the last of the daylight faded, she found herself walking toward the conservatory. She did not plan it. Her feet simply carried her there. The glass-walled room was fogged with condensation. Inside, the air was warmer, thick with the scent of earth and green things. Plants lined the shelves and tables, their leaves dark and glossy. A small bench sat near the center of the room. She stepped inside and found him already there. He stood before the misted glass, his back to her. He did not turn when she entered, but she knew he was aware of her. She walked slowly toward him and stopped a few feet away. They stood in silence, side by side, looking out at the darkened gardens. I used to come here, she said quietly, when I was here before. I know. You never changed it. No way. He was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice low. Because I have been watching you, he said, not since you arrived, but for years, through gallery openings, through mentions in art reviews, through the careful architecture of a life you built without me. She turned to face him. You watched me. I never stopped. Her breath caught. I had no right, he continued. I know that, but I could not help it. I needed to know that you were well, that you had not been destroyed by my cowardice. I was not destroyed. No, you were not. He turned to face her fully. The light was dim, but she could see his eyes, the honesty in them, the regret. I cannot ask you to forgive me, he said. I cannot undo what I did. but I can tell you that I have regretted it every day since. Eleanor's hands trembled. She clasped them together. I cannot undo the years of silence, she said quietly. I cannot pretend that trust is automatic, but I am choosing now to stay. Not because you defended me, not because of what you said, but because I see, finally, the man beneath the title. And that man is worth knowing. He stared at her. Something in his expression broke open. Slowly, deliberately, he removed his glove. His bare hand, pale in the dim light, reached toward hers. She did not pull away. His fingers closed over hers. Warm, steady. They stood like that for a long moment, not speaking, simply present. Then he leaned forward, and she did not step back. The kiss was brief, restrained, full of presence rather than passion. It was not the reunion of a fairy tale. It was two people choosing the difficult work of beginning again. The portrait was completed 3 weeks later. Eleanor worked with meticulous care, layering oils with precision, capturing not just the Duke's likeness, but something deeper. The man in the painting was direct, unguarded, his gaze steady but not distant. It was not the stoic formality expected of such works. It was honest. When it was finished, she stood back and studied it for a long time. The Duke entered the study and stopped beside her. It is remarkable, he said quietly. It is you, is it? Yes. He was silent for a moment. Then he turned to her. Will you sign it? You requested it unsigned. I have changed my mind. She hesitated. Then she picked up her brush, dipped it in paint, and signed her name in small, careful letters in the lower corner. Eleanor Shaw. The portrait was sent to Parliament the following week. Those who viewed it remarked that it seemed more honest than heroic. Some found it unsettling. Others found it compelling. Eleanor did not stay to hear their opinions. She returned to London, to her studio, to her routines, to the life she had built. But letters arrived. Not grand declarations, not apologies, simply correspondence. He wrote of the political fallout, of the slow work of rebuilding alliances, of small victories and larger setbacks. She wrote of a new commission, of her mother's improving health, of the way the light fell in her studio in the early morning. They did not rush. 1 month later, he arrived at her studio unannounced. It was evening. Lamplight spilled from the window onto the cobblestones. She heard the knock and opened the door to find him standing there, hat in hand, snow dusting his shoulders. Your Grace, she said. Eleanor. She stepped aside. He entered. The studio was small, cluttered with canvases and brushes, and jars of paint. The scent of linseed oil hung in the air. A fire burned low in the hearth. He looked around, taking it in. Then he turned to her. I have a request, he said. Another commission, of a sort. She waited. I would like you to paint me again, he said, but not for Parliament. Not for anyone's eyes but my own. She studied him. Why? Because the man in that portrait is the man I want to be, and I need a reminder. She considered this. Then she nodded. Very well, he smiled. A real smile. Not the careful expression he wore in public, but something genuine. She gestured toward the chair near the window. Sit, he did. She picked up her sketchpad and charcoal. This time, when she began to draw, he was smiling. The work took several weeks. He came to her studio in the evenings, after his obligations were met. They spoke little during the sittings, but the silence was comfortable now, companionable. When the portrait was finished, she did not show it to him immediately. She waited until the paint had dried, until the light was right. Then she invited him to see it. He stood before the canvas for a long time. The man in the painting was not a duke. He was simply a man, smiling, at ease, present. It is perfect, he said quietly. She stood beside him. It is you. He turned to her. Will you keep it? It is yours. Then I will leave it here. She looked at him, surprised. So I have a reason to return, he said. She did not argue. That evening they sat together in her small studio, the fire crackling, the lamplight soft. He told her about his work in Parliament. She told him about a new commission, a family portrait for a merchant's widow. They did not speak of the past. They did not make grand promises. They simply sat together. And when he rose to leave, he took her hand and pressed it gently. May I return tomorrow? He asked. Yes, he smiled. And then he left. Eleanor stood at the window and watched him walk down the street, his figure disappearing into the winter evening. She did not know what the future held, but she knew, with quiet certainty, that she was no longer afraid of it. Permanence, she thought, was not the absence of doubt. It was the decision to remain, and she had made her choice.